構わず悪態をつくんだ。
でしょ？私が今まで見た戦士妖精。やめて。ちょっと何するの?
In a world where fairies are hated, a girl wants to see the day when fairies and humans are treated as equals. Hello and welcome back to our channel I Sky. Today we are going to do a recap of the anime series called Sugar Apple Fairy Tale. Episode 1. The episode starts off with Anne leaving her village with her cart and horse because she wants to enter a nationwide sugar confectioners competition. Anne's mother was a silver sugar master and she made beautiful confections with silver sugar. Anne's single mother raised her and taught her all she knows about fairies and sugar confections. Before she can leave, her childhood friend and a noble, Jonas Anders, stops her and proposes to her. She knows he isn't being serious and is doing so out of pity and just drives by while he finishes his speech. From Anne's reminding about her childhood and her mother, we find out that they live in a world with fairies, and that fairies ruled over humans before. Silver sugar artisans respect and love the fairies since they are the ones who introduced sugar confection. But some 500 years ago, the human, who greatly outnumbered the fairies, rose up and forced them into slavery. Now, fairies are sold as slaves in designated slave markets. Fairies are more powerful than humans, but their wings are their heart. So, the humans tear off one wing and use it to force them into slavery. Any damage to the wing is fatal for them. While everyone hates fairies and thinks slavery is fine. This doesn't sit well with Anne because she believes that fairies and humans can be friends. At the start of her journey, we see Anne arrive in a town and there a fairy hunter is beating and hurting his labor fairy. Anne finds out that no one is helping or stopping the hunter because the victim is a fairy, and people are sacred to the hunter. Courageously, Anne sneaks up on the hunter and saves the fairy. She gives him his wing back, and the fairy flees the scene saying he will never thank a human ever. The bully hunter turns on Anne, but the villagers intervene here. We see just how people think that hurting a fairy slave is fine and good, but have different standards when it comes to humans. Anne visits the fairy market because she wants to buy a warrior fairy to protect her on her journey. The roads she's going to travel through are pretty dangerous with wild crows, wolves, and bandits. Anne finds herself facing a rather beautiful black warrior fairy. The fairy is pretty sassy and has a sharp tongue. He calls Anne a scarecrow and invites her to buy him. She wasn't particularly planning on buying it, but when the merchant squeezes his wing, she buys him to stop the merchant. The fairy introduces himself as Shao Fen Shao, and Anne decides to call him Shao. During their journey, we get to see how naive and idealistic Anne is with her ideals of fairies and humans being friends. She's an all-around good girl, but feisty too. Meanwhile, Shao Fen Shao is sly and constantly teases Anne, who gets riled up pretty easily. Anne promises Shao that he will free him and return his wing when Anne reaches the capital. Bandits attack Anne's cart, and she asks Shao to protect her, but he says he will only obey when she gives him an order. Flustered by his words, Anne tells him to protect her or she will punch him. Shao reluctantly decides to interpret this as an order, and we finally see why this handsome fairy is a warrior fairy. He defeats the bandits using a sword and isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Episode 2. Anne finds Jonas riding the second carriage. He followed Anne onto Lewiston Road. They catch up. Anne argues with him to go back, but he fervently refuses and confesses his love again. Anne doesn't seem to be getting through to him, so she reluctantly relents. Shell is surprised and teases Anne about having an admirer. Anne rides ahead after Shell notices a wild crow flocking together after they smelled the bandits' blood. Having understood Shell and her relationship as master-servant better now, Anne tells Shell that she will always make requests first, and if he refuses, then only will she order him. Undeterred, Jonas catches up with Anne and meets her at the shelter. She asks him to turn back, but he says he's here on his own path, to be a sugar artisan. Anne stops fitting him over this. Anne is busy making soup for dinner. She goes to offer some to Jonas and meets his labor fairy Kathy since Jonas has retired. Kathy exclaims that such crude food doesn't suit Jonah. Disappointed, Anne takes it back. She offers some soup to Shao, and he's taken aback. Not understanding his reaction, Anne's anger gets the best of her, and she lashes out strongly at Shao. He just stands there and listens to her rant and bellow, and then tells her that he was surprised because she served him before eating herself. He absorbs the soup and Anne learns that fairies can eat sugar confections. She promises to make him one at that moment. Anne hears a strange sound from the carriage, and when she goes to check it out, she finds the labor fairy she saved inside the carriage. He introduces himself as Mithril Lid Pod, and he followed Anne because he wanted to repay her favor. Anne says he doesn't need to, but he continuously keeps insisting and is obnoxious. Anne, losing her patience, wraps herself and goes to sleep after promising Shell some silver sugar desserts. Mithril Lid Pod nags them all night long. During their journey, they see wood crows gathering overhead. Shell explains that they didn't scavenge yesterday, so they have flocked together to hunt live prey. The wild crows start attacking Jonas's carriage, and Anne is worried. She orders Shell to defend them from the crows, and he does so. Afterwards, during the journey, we find out why Anne is determined to take part in the sugar confectioners competition and become a silver sugar master. Anne wants them to reach the shelter, but the crows' attack has delayed their journey and they won't reach the next shelter before nightfall. So, using her mom's old map, she decides they should stay at the doctor's inn. Anne is determined, and Jonas tells her that the map isn't probably even accurate. She reacts violently to this, and Shell takes note of this change. Her determination bears fruit and they reach the doctor's inn. Finally, Anne is happy to get some rest on an actual bed. Episode 3. At the doctor's inn, a stranger named Hugh gets interested in Anne when she requests the doctor if the fairies can dine with them. He asks both Anne and Jonas to make sugar sweets for him. Anne takes a page from her mother's book and makes a rose that would make the white sugar shine. But he crushes both of their designs and dishes out some heavy critique. My heart broke for them both, especially Anne. Well, this Hugh character may be one of the judges at the competition, or better yet, a royal sugar sweet master. Anne is heartbroken and runs to her room. Shell comes in, first teases her, then unexpectedly comforts her. He tells her he will grow up beautifully in a few years, and her silver sugar making skills will increase and change too. Anne, in her typical fashion, flares up and argues with him. Then, Shell shares the story of his birth, how he was born from the gaze of a young girl, Liz, who had strawberry blonde hair just like Anne's. He was 7 years old then. And then 15 years passed in which Shell remained by her side. Shell was making a point here, but he wouldn't have revealed his origin if he didn't trust Anne. Anne probes more and finds out that Liz died at the hands of humans, and Anne realizes that this causes Shell's heart to freeze. She decides to make him some silver sugar sweets. When Anne goes into her carriage, he finds 2 whole barrels missing. He panics and cries. Shell runs to see what happened, and Jonas is on the scene too. Kathy points out Mithril is the culprit, which he fervently denies, but upon seeing the suspicion in Anne's eyes, he disappears, heartbroken. Anne doesn't have enough sugar for her entry piece and doesn't know what to do. Jonas recommends that she make more silver sugar from sweet apples. They can be found along the path. With silver sugar ready, Anne thinks long and hard and decides to use her mother's designs to make a masterpiece. When she gets started, Jonas confesses his love and tries to kiss Anne. She slaps him after some hard work and completes her piece and is having a moment with Shell. Suddenly, Jonas comes out and congratulates Anne, and then says we need to hurry. Before Anne can make of the situation, Jonas has her carriage with the design attached to his horses and rides away. While wild hounds run towards the shelter, Kathy lured them with some filthy blood. Episode 4. After Jonas's betrayal and his stealing Anne's piece for the exhibition, Anne's heartbroken and very emotional. She takes it out on Shell and then returns his wing to him since her journey has ended here for her. When Shell takes the wing and seemingly leaves, Anne starts full-on crying about why her mother left her alone. Anne's only 15 and her mother was her world. And after her death, she wasn't able to grieve her death and felt very alone. So, when Shell leaves, it hits her so hard. Eventually, she cries herself to sleep and wakes up in the morning, feeling hungry, and finds some wild berries, and before she can pick out one, her gaze causes a fairy to form there. The cute little fairy introduces herself and Shell appears too. He warns the fairy to stay away from humans because they enslave fairies, and she takes his advice and flies off. Then, he gives Anne a shirt to change out of her bloodied clothes. Anne asks him why he hasn't left, and he tells her that he wants to be friends with her because she's different, and she still hasn't fulfilled her promise to him to make him sugar confections. With renewed vigor and hope, Anne goes into her carriage to make a sugar confection for Shell that is beautiful. Fueling her feelings into work, Anne makes an original piece, featured after the fairy she met in the berries bush. Shell accepts it and suddenly takes Anne out for a ride. He's taking her to Lewiston to enter her piece in the exhibition. Despite traveling through the night, they barely make it, and even then Anne is only able to enter because Hugh helps them. Hugh is the current silver sugar viscount. Surprise, surprise. He got Anne into the exhibition, and she given a station alongside Jonas, who can't help but taunt Anne even though he was the one who betrayed her. The king chooses Anne and Jonas's piece, and while he likes Anne's piece, it's small, and the queen comments that the exhibition piece should be big and spectacular. So he goes with Jonas's piece. Anne is very sad that she lost to the piece that she made. But tables turn when Mithril comes out of the Jonas's third sugar barrel. He's eaten all the sugar and spins up a story of Jonas being a crappy sugar maker. Jonas gets angry and points at Anne that she's Mithril master, and at Mithril's prompt, she tells them about Jonas's treachery. They get into a huge fight, and this was the highlight of the episode for me. Anne doesn't back down, and Hugh advises that settle this with a small competition. Jonas's bigger piece contains butterflies, and whoever can make similar looking ones wins. Jonas is afraid, and right he should be. He doesn't know how to make butterflies. In just one look, Hugh and the other can see that Anne made the butterflies, and not Jonas. But Hugh comments that Anne's butterflies now are different, and the king catches on it. Anne was able to overcome her fears and create an original butterfly that was even more beautiful. The king declares that no medal will be awarded this year, and the queen encourages Anne to participate next year. And that's all for today, guys. If you liked the recap and want more summaries like this, consider subscribing to our channel.